Captain Elisa Red Halloran stood at the bridge of the Crimson Fury, her knuckles white as she gripped the command console. Through the ship's thick, reinforced viewport, the vast expanse of the silent void stretched endlessly, a dark sea of stars and swirling gas clouds. The mission had already begun, but the tension in the air was palpable. Halloran's team, each an expert in their own right, was ready for what lay ahead. They had trained for months for this very moment, but even the most rigorous preparation could not remove the anxiety that came with facing the Exarian. "We're in position," Captain Lieutenant Work said, his voice calm but with an undercurrent of anticipation. He was at the helm, navigating the Crimson Fury through the void's dangerous, uncharted regions. "Commence Phase 1, Halloran ordered, her voice steady despite the weight of the decision. The first phase of their mission was deceptively simple. Infiltrate an Exarian weapons facility on the edge of Exarian-controlled space and retrieve crucial intelligence on a new weapon they were rumored to be developing. But Halloran knew that this would be anything but simple. The Exarian were masters of deception, and they had been tracking human activity in the region for weeks. This mission could be their last if they weren't careful. Moments later, the ship's engines powered down, and the Crimson Fury drifted silently, cloaked in the ship's advanced stealth system. For now, they were invisible to the Exarians' advanced sensors. They would need to rely on their skill, precision, and the element of surprise. "Alpha Team, you're up," Halloran called over the comms. Her voice echoed in the small, dimly lit room, where the rest of the team was already suited up in their combat gear. Each member of the Vanguard had been handpicked not just for their prowess in battle, but for their ability to think on their feet when the plan inevitably went sideways. As the airlock opened, Halloran led the way, her boots thudding softly against the metal floor of the transport shuttle. The rest of the squad followed in perfect formation, weapons drawn. Sergeant Brooks, the heavy weapons expert, gripped his pulse rifle with both hands, while tech specialist Sarah Lee focused on her multi-tool, preparing to disable any security systems they might encounter. "We're 10 minutes from the facility," Halloran said, her voice steady. "Stay sharp. This is a reconnaissance mission first. If we engage, it's because we don't have a choice." The shuttle's engines hummed, and the air was thick with the smell of synthetic polymers. Despite her commanding presence, Halloran couldn't help but feel the creeping weight of the moment. If they failed, the Exarian would have full control of a weapon capable of eradicating entire fleets of ships. Humanity could not afford failure. Minutes passed as they closed in on their target. The facility loomed ahead, a sleek, fortress-like structure nestled within the asteroid belt. To the untrained eye, it appeared abandoned, its defensive shields barely perceptible, and its external sensors seemingly inactive. But Halloran knew better. The Exarian were not fools. Their enemies had learned to fear humanity's unpredictability, and they would not leave such a vital facility unguarded. "Prepare for breach," Halloran ordered, her voice cold. With one swift motion, she pulled the emergency release for the shuttle's hatch. It slid open, and the team stormed out, boots crunching against the asteroid's surface, their breathing steady despite the gravity-defying conditions. They moved in a well-practiced pattern, the shadows of their movements blending into the rock around them. As they approached the facility's outer walls, Halloran's gut tightened. Something was wrong. She couldn't shake the feeling that they were walking into a trap. But the mission had already been set into motion. There was no turning back now. Then, as they reached the entry point, the quiet, calm of the void shattered. "Ambush!" Rourke's voice echoed over the comms as a wave of Exarian drones dropped from the shadows, their glowing red eyes scanning the Vanguard. Fall back, Halloran shouted, but it was too late. The Exarian were prepared. Their weapons fired in quick bursts, and the Vanguard dove into action, returning fire as they took cover behind debris and crumbling asteroid rock. The fight for survival had begun. The air crackled with the sound of energy pulses, and the whine of plasma charges as the Vanguard engaged in a deadly firefight. Halloran's heart pounded in her chest, her breath steady but sharp. She scanned the battlefield, eyes darting from her team to the enemy, calculating the next move in the milliseconds between bursts of gunfire. "Brooks, take out the left flank," Halloran commanded, her voice steady, even as the chaos raged around her. "On it, Captain," Brooks grunted, his voice strained under the pressure. The heavy weapons expert moved with lethal precision, his oversized pulse rifle roaring as it unleashed a torrent of fire on the advancing Xarian drones. They crumpled under the barrage, but more kept coming, relentless and unstoppable. Halloran ducked behind a large rock formation, her mind racing. She had expected resistance, but not like this. These weren't just random drones. The Xarian had deployed their elite soldiers, Zarkath, genetically enhanced warriors that rivaled the toughest of humanity's special forces. Towering and built for war, the Zarkath's dark exosuits seemed impervious to anything but direct hits to their weak points, tiny gaps in their armor near the joints. "Lie on me," Halloran barked, motioning to the tech specialist. Sarah Lai was quick to respond, her nimble fingers flying across her wrist pad as she hacked into the Xarian's security system. A moment later, she grinned. "Gotcha," Lai muttered, and with a series of taps, she overloaded the facility's defense turrets, sending them into disarray. The Zarkid soldiers turned to face the threat, their movements sluggish as their systems reset. "Now, Rourke," Halloran shouted, signaling the sniper. Rourke didn't need another command. From his elevated position, he picked off the confused Zarkath soldiers one by one, his shots precise and deadly. As the Zarkath fell, their shields flickered and collapsed, leaving them vulnerable. "Moving in," Halloran called, and the Vanguard surged forward, charging through the open space toward the facility's entrance. The Xarian drones tried to regroup, but the Vanguard was already on the offensive. "Go, go, go!" Sergeant Brooks yelled, pushing forward with his heavy rifle, cutting down anything that moved in his path. The team moved like a single entity, a well-oiled machine operating with military precision, but the violence of the battle was far from over. As they reached the facility's entrance, Halloran signaled for the team to halt. She could see the control room ahead. Its reinforced door was shut tight, and there was no indication of any Xarian inside. Something didn't sit right. The Xarian had to know they were coming. The trap was just the beginning, but what was the real play? "Lai, what do you see?" Halloran asked, her voice tight with concern. Lai adjusted her wrist pad and squinted at the screen. "Nothing, Captain. No other hostiles in sight. But the systems inside are all locked down. They're expecting us to make a move. The real surprise is waiting behind that door." Halloran frowned, her gut telling her this was more than just a facility. "Everyone, get ready for anything." Before they could prepare further, the facility's automated defense systems kicked into high gear. The floor beneath their feet trembled as massive blast doors sealed off every exit and lights flickered on and off. From the silence that followed, it was clear that this wasn't just a trap. It was a test of humanity's resolve, and the Xarian were watching, waiting for them to break. "Captain, we've got company." Rourke's voice crackled over the comms. The sound of marching feet echoed down the hallway, and Halloran's stomach clenched. Zarkath elite soldiers, and they were closing in fast. "Prepare for breach," Halloran shouted. "We fight through the door." As the Vanguard braced for the oncoming assault, the heavy blast doors in front of them began to open, revealing a squadron of Zarkath soldiers advancing in full force. But Halloran wasn't backing down. She felt the fire of battle surge in her veins, the sense of purpose that had driven humanity to this moment. They might be surrounded, but the Vanguard would fight until the very end. The first wave of Zarkath crashed into them, their exosuits colliding with the Vanguard in a cacophony of steel and energy. Halloran's pulse rifle fired at the exposed weak points of the advancing enemies, while Brooks and Lee covered their flanks. But there were too many of them. In the midst of the chaos, Halloran's wrist pad beeped. A flashing red light indicated an incoming transmission. A voice, cold and mechanical, crackled over the comms. "Humanity will fall. Your resistance is futile." The message was clear. The Exarian had not just set a trap. They had set the stage for the end of humanity's fight. "Not today," Halloran muttered under her breath. She had no intention of letting the Exarian win. Not now, not ever. With one final command, she led the Vanguard into the heart of the facility, the battle for humanity's survival taking on a whole new deadly urgency. The battlefield was a blur of flashing lights, gunfire, and the heavy thud of armored feet as the Vanguard pressed deeper into the heart of the Exarian facility. The Zarkath soldiers, relentless and ruthless, were closing in from all sides. Halloran ducked behind a blast shield, her rifle smoking from continuous fire as she reloaded. The air was thick with the stench of burned ozone, the remnants of the battle lingering in every corner. "Captain, we've reached the data core," Lee's voice crackled through the comms. "We need to breach the final door. It's heavily reinforced. This is where the real intel is stored." Halloran took a quick glance at the readout on her wristpad. The door ahead was a solid, unyielding barrier, clearly built to withstand even the most advanced weaponry. She wasn't sure how much longer the Vanguard could hold off the Exarian onslaught. "How long until you can get us in, Lee?" Halloran asked, her eyes scanning the surroundings for any movement. The Zarkath had been smart, flanking them from above, cutting off their escape routes. Time was running out. "I'll need 5 minutes, maybe less if I bypass the security grid manually," Lag responded, her voice calm but tinged with strain. "5 minutes is too long," Halloran said, her voice sharp. She glanced over at Rourke, who was perched on a high ledge, scanning the battlefield through his sniper scope. "Can you give us 5 minutes of cover, Lieutenant?" Halloran asked. Rourke didn't hesitate. "I've got you covered, Captain, but make it quick." He aimed his sniper rifle, zeroing in on the Zarkath soldiers who were rapidly advancing from the left. "Brooks, take the right. Lie, start working on that door," Halloran ordered. "We're not leaving here without that intel. Do whatever it takes." The team split into action, each member taking their assigned position. Brooks was at the front, laying down heavy fire with his pulse cannon, his booming shots reverberating through the metal walls as he took out the incoming drones. Lai was already crouched in front of the security panel, her fingers flying over the interface, tapping in lines of code at a speed that bordered on the impossible. Halloran kept her focus sharp, her eyes flicking between her team and the approaching Exarian. The adrenaline surged in her veins as she felt the pressure of the mission closing in around her. Failure wasn't an option, not with everything on the line. A sudden explosion rattled the floor beneath them, sending a cloud of dust into the air. Halloran barely managed to duck behind cover in time as debris rained down on their position. The Exarian had upped the ante, launching grenades and explosives to flush them out. "Lee," Halloran shouted, her voice urgent. "We don't have much time." "Almost there," Lee shouted back, her face twisted in concentration. Sparks flew from the security panel as she hacked her way through the last layer of encryption. "Ready," Lee called out just as the sound of pounding footsteps echoed down the hallway. Halloran turned just in time to see the blast doors in front of them begin to retract with a heavy, grinding noise. She didn't wait for it to fully open. Leaping forward, she signaled for the rest of the team to follow. "Move," she barked, her voice cutting through the chaos. They rushed into the dark, high-security room, and Lai immediately went to work, connecting her wrist pad to the central data terminal. The room was silent, except for the occasional hum of the facility's power grid. The data core was massive, a towering structure of alien technology designed to store vast quantities of information. This was where the Xarian kept their most classified secrets. As Lei worked, the others fanned out, keeping a sharp eye on the entrance. Halloran couldn't shake the feeling that they were being watched, an odd, lingering sensation that made her skin prickle. She could sense it in the air. The Xarian weren't just defending their weapons. They were protecting something much more valuable. A shrill alarm suddenly blared, and the walls of the room began to vibrate. A red warning light bathed the area in a sinister glow. Not again, Lei muttered, her fingers flying across the terminal's interface in a desperate attempt to override the alarm system. Xarian reinforcements are incoming. Rourke's voice echoed over the comms. Captain, they've called in the heavy hitters. The door at the far end of the room slammed shut, locking them in. Halloran's mind raced as she analyzed the situation. The Xarian had known they would come for this intel. The trap had been set, and they had walked right into it. But now they had something the Xarian would never want humanity to see. Proof of their greatest weapon, hidden deep within the facility's data archives. We need to extract now, Halloran ordered, her voice cutting through the tension. Lee, how much longer? Lee's face was drawn with frustration, but her voice remained calm. A minute, Captain, I've almost got everything. Halloran looked at her team, their faces set with determination. It was clear that they wouldn't go down without a fight. But the truth of the Xarians' plans was within their reach. They had to hold the line. The mission was too important. Then, just as Lee finished her work and the final files began to download, the door at the far end of the room shattered in a blast of red-hot energy. A squad of Zarkath soldiers, equipped with energy shields and combat rifles, stormed through, firing immediately. "Get ready," Halloran shouted. She aimed her rifle, and the battle began again. This time, there would be no retreat. The Zarkath soldiers advanced relentlessly, their heavy boots pounding against the metal floor as they stormed into the data core room. Halloran barely had time to react. She dove for cover behind a console as energy blasts from the Zarkath's rifles lit up the space around her. Sparks flew from the walls as their weapons tore into the surroundings. She could hear her team moving quickly, returning fire, but the sheer number of Xarian soldiers was overwhelming. "Lie, is the data secure?" Halloran shouted over the deafening fire. "Almost there," Lee called back, her voice strained. She was hunched over the terminal, frantically scrolling through the files as the countdown on her wrist pad ticked down. "One more minute, Captain, I'm pulling the last of it." Halloran gritted her teeth, heart racing. The mission had already cost them too much. They couldn't afford to fail now. She peeked out from behind her cover, firing a short burst from her rifle into the advancing Zarkath. One of the soldiers dropped, but the others closed the distance too quickly. "Brooks, give us some breathing room," Halloran yelled. The heavy weapons expert, who had been laying down cover fire, nodded and moved to the front of the room. With a growl, he fired a shoulder-mounted grenade launcher. The blast rocked the Zarkath, sending several of them flying backward. But even that wasn't enough to stop the tide of Xarian soldiers. They kept coming relentlessly. "Keep pushing forward," Halloran barked as she reloaded. "We hold them off long enough for Lie to finish." Brooks unleashed another wave of grenades, but Halloran knew that the Xarian would adapt quickly. The Zarkath were elite soldiers, trained to counter tactics like this, and they had one advantage: numbers. A loud bang rang through the room as the doors to the data core slid shut with a thud. Halloran's stomach twisted. They were locked in, and the room was rapidly filling with more enemies. "Captain, the Zarkath will breach the main entry in 5 minutes." Rourke's voice crackled through the comms. "We need to leave now." "I can't pull the team out yet," Halloran snapped. "Lee, how long until that data is ours?" "I've got it. I've got everything," Lee shouted just as the download completed. A few seconds later, the terminal chimed, signaling the end of the extraction. "It's all here, Captain. The Xarian's secret weapon, everything we need to stop them." "Good," Halloran said, her voice cold and determined. Now we get out of here. She signaled to Brooks, who immediately started laying down fire at the main door. Halloran didn't wait for him to finish before rushing forward. The Vanguard moved with precision, despite the overwhelming odds. Orcs' sniper shots kept the Exarian at bay as the team made their way to the now unlocked exit tunnel. Move, 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 Halloran shouted, her eyes scanning the hallway for any signs of an ambush. The walls around them began to shake as the Exarians scrambled to regroup, their heavy footsteps getting closer with every passing second. Captain, the facility's going into lockdown, Lee shouted, a note of panic creeping into her voice. The entire station is sealing off the escape routes. Of course they are, Halloran muttered. Hold your ground, people. We'll fight our way out if we have to. Brooks took point, using his heavy rifle to clear the path as the team sprinted down the hallway. Halloran kept a tight grip on her rifle, her eyes darting from side to side, fully aware of the danger they were in. Their escape was becoming more difficult by the second. Another blast rocked the walls of the corridor, and the ceiling began to crack. Rubble tumbled down, blocking the path ahead. Captain, we're running out of time, Lee shouted, her voice high with urgency. We can't hold off much longer. We don't need to hold them off. We need to get to the extraction point, Halloran said, her tone sharp as she turned to face her team. Rourke, keep them off us. Lie, stay with me. Brooks, take the rear and cover our escape. The team moved as one, forcing their way through the debris and into the maintenance tunnels that ran beneath the facility. They were miles away from the Crimson Fury, but Halloran knew they had to make it. The Exarian couldn't be allowed to recover the data, and humanity needed what they had now more than ever. Rourke, any sign of Exarian reinforcements? Halloran asked, her voice tight with anxiety. Not yet, but it won't be long. The Exarian are always one step ahead, Rourke responded, his tone grim. I'm keeping them at bay for now, but you've got to move faster. As the Vanguard sprinted through the twisting tunnels, Halloran's mind raced. They had the data, humanity's salvation, but at what cost? Each moment they spent here, fighting for their lives, was another moment the Exarian would use to build their new weapon, the one that could change the entire course of the war. And they had no idea just how deadly the Exarian's secret weapon truly was. The walls of the maintenance tunnels flickered with intermittent lights as they navigated the maze-like corridors. The air was thick with the smell of ozone and dust, and Halloran's every step was measured. The Zarkath were relentless, and they were closing in. Stay sharp, Halloran ordered. We're almost there. But even as she spoke, the pounding of footsteps echoed from behind them. The Exarian weren't giving up. The maintenance tunnel stretched ahead, a dark and narrow path barely lit by flickering emergency lights. The hum of the facility's failing power grid was the only sound, apart from the steady thudding of boots and the rapid exchange of gunfire echoing from behind them. Halloran's heart raced, each step pounding like a countdown toward their imminent extraction, or, more likely, death. Rourke, any sign of movement behind us? Halloran panted, her voice steady despite the pressure mounting around them. I've got eyes on them, Rourke answered, his voice calm but tinged with strain. Zarkath closing in, but they're not getting too close. Yet. Good. Let's keep it that way. Halloran's eyes flicked over to Lai, who was clutching the data pad tightly in her hands. Lai was breathing hard, sweat slicking her forehead as she moved with purpose, despite the exhaustion threatening to overtake her. The data they had stolen was humanity's last hope, and Halloran would be damned if they let it fall into Exarian hands now. Lai glanced up at her. Captain, I'm pulling up a map of the lower tunnels, she said, voice tight. There's an exit ahead that leads to an old maintenance hangar. If we're lucky, it'll still be functional. Lead the way, Halloran ordered. They pressed forward with a renewed sense of urgency. The hallway was tight, the metallic walls reflecting the sound of their footsteps, making them feel more exposed with each passing second. Behind them, the sound of the Zarketh soldiers grew louder, the Exarian clearly unwilling to let them escape. The Vanguard had come too far to be caught now, not when they were so close to the extraction point. "Captain," Lai called out, breaking Halloran's thoughts. "I'm picking up something strange. The Exarian have activated something on their end. It's not just a security lockdown. I think they're initiating a self-destruct protocol." A chill ran through Halloran's veins. "How long do we have?" 5 minutes, tops," Lai said, her eyes wide with panic. "If we don't make it out by then." "Then we don't make it out," Halloran interrupted firmly, her tone cutting through the tension. "We keep moving. We don't have time to waste. Just get us to the hangar." They pushed on, sweat stinging their eyes, hearts hammering in their chests. The sound of footsteps grew louder, closer. Rourke fired again, the crack of his sniper rifle cutting through the silence, and the scream of a Zarketh soldier echoed as he fell. "Keep going," Halloran barked, spurring her team forward. "We don't stop until we're in the hangar." Another explosion echoed from behind them, this one too close for comfort. The walls around them trembled, and debris rained down from above, forcing them to duck and dive for cover. "Captain," Lai shouted, pointing ahead. "There, up ahead. The hangar's just beyond that next corridor." Halloran's eyes narrowed as she scanned the path ahead. The hangar doors loomed in the distance, a massive blast door barely visible through the haze of dust. But between them and safety stood a dozen Zarketh soldiers, their dark exosuits gleaming menacingly in the dim light. "We don't have time for a fight," Halloran muttered under her breath. "Brooks, can you clear a path?" Brooks nodded, his jaw set with grim determination. "Aye, Captain." He lifted his pulse cannon, the massive weapon almost as large as he was, and began firing in quick succession. The Zarketh soldiers staggered under the onslaught, their armor sparking as they absorbed the blows. The ground trembled beneath Halloran's feet as the heavy artillery blasted their enemies back. "Lai, get that door open," Halloran shouted. Lee darted toward the control panel beside the hangar door, fingers flying over the interface. Sparks flew as she hacked into the Exarian's emergency override system, her face locked in concentration. The Zarketh were regrouping, but they weren't fast enough to stop her. Come on," Lee muttered, her voice tense as the countdown on her wrist pad neared 0. The seconds stretched on like hours. Halloran kept her rifle aimed at the incoming enemies, firing in short bursts to keep them pinned down. Every shot that missed felt like a wasted breath, but she couldn't afford to focus on that. They needed to move, and they needed to move fast. The explosion of a nearby Zarketh soldier throwing a grenade rocked the hallway, sending shockwaves through the air. A few meters to the right, Brooks slammed into the wall, forced to duck as debris rained down, but he was back on his feet in an instant, his cannon continuing its merciless barrage. Finally, with a loud hiss, the massive blast doors creaked open, revealing the hangar beyond, a sprawling, dimly lit expanse filled with rusted equipment, abandoned ships, and rows of broken tech. It was a relic of a past that had been long forgotten, but it was their way out. "Move," Halloran shouted. "Everyone inside." The Vanguard surged forward, the tension in their bodies almost palpable as they dashed through the hangar doors. Lai was already at a control console, frantically scanning the area for any sign of an active transport. There had to be something. Halloran could hear the Zarketh right behind them, the screech of their heavy boots pounding against the floor. Then, as if by fate, a fate-whirring sound filled the air. The low hum of an old transport ship, one that hadn't been used in years, came to life. "Got it," Lee cried. "The ship's functional. I've activated the auxiliary engines, but it'll take a few minutes to fully power up." Halloran looked toward the approaching Zarketh, her mind racing. The transport ship was their only escape, and they had mere minutes to board before the Exarian descended upon them. The sound of their weapons charging up was like a countdown in her ears. "We fight until we're gone," Halloran ordered. "Cover the ship. Don't let them take us down." The Vanguard turned, rifles raised, ready to face the oncoming storm. The Zarkath had underestimated them before, but they wouldn't make the same mistake again. This was the final push. With the data in their hands and humanity's future hanging in the balance, the Vanguard would give everything to survive. The sound of approaching footsteps echoed down the hangar's narrow corridors, growing louder with every passing second. The Zarkath were relentless, and Halloran could feel the weight of every second pressing down on them. Lai was working frantically to power up the transport ship, her fingers flying over the controls with a focus that could only come from sheer willpower. "Lai, how much longer?" Halloran barked, keeping her rifle trained on the hangar's entrance. "Just a few more seconds, Captain," Lai replied, her voice steady but tight with tension. "The engine's stabilizing. I can get us airborne in less than a minute, but—" "You're gonna have less than a minute," Halloran interrupted. She scanned the hangar, noting the shadows gathering at the far end of the room. "We need to hold them off until then." Brooks stepped forward, his massive frame cutting an imposing silhouette against the dim light of the hangar. He lifted his pulse cannon and fired again, sending a volley of high-powered shots into the growing crowd of Zarkath soldiers. The blasts tore through the air, hitting their targets with precise, brutal force. But the Xarian kept coming, their armor shimmering as they advanced, seemingly undeterred by the firepower thrown at them. "We don't have much time before they overwhelm us," Orc called out, his sniper rifle barking as he picked off a Zarkath at the back of the group. "We're gonna need more than firepower to hold them back." Halloran's eyes narrowed as she took stock of the situation. They were outnumbered, and even with the heavy weapons they had at their disposal, there was no way they'd be able to fight off an entire squad of Xarian soldiers for long. They needed a distraction, something that could buy them just enough time to get the ship ready. "Brooks, take the front. Rourke, cover the perimeter," Halloran ordered, her voice commanding. "I'll go with Lai and make sure the ship gets off the ground." As the team moved into position, Halloran and Lee made their way to the control console of the transport ship. Halloran's pulse quickened as the countdown on her wrist pad showed only 30 seconds remaining before the Zarkath would break through. She had to trust her team to hold the line for those precious few moments. "Hang on, Lee," Halloran said through gritted teeth, watching the other woman work. "You're doing great. Just a few more seconds." Lai's hands were shaking, sweat dripping from her forehead as she accessed the final sequences in the ship's systems. She pressed a series of buttons, her brow furrowed in concentration. "I'm almost there, Captain. The engines are priming." Just. An explosion rocked the hangar, shaking the walls and knocking Halloran off her feet. She barely managed to stay upright, instinctively reaching out to steady herself on the console. The blast came from the far side of the hangar, where the Xarian had just breached the perimeter. "Brooks," Halloran shouted into her comms, "we need to buy more time." "On it, Captain," Brooks' voice came through, gruff and focused. The loud roar of his pulse cannon fired in rapid succession, followed by the sharp crack of Zarkath bodies hitting the ground. But even as Brooks poured everything he had into holding the line, Halloran could hear the movement of reinforcements pushing in from every direction. Lai didn't hesitate. "I'm activating the secondary thrusters now," she said, her voice strained as the engines roared to life, shaking the entire hangar. "We're going up, Captain." The massive transport ship began to lift off, the heavy vibrations rattling Halloran's bones as the ground beneath them seemed to tremble. The Zarkath had no way of stopping them now, not without cutting off their escape route entirely. But they weren't giving up that easily. Halloran's heart raced as she saw the hangar doors slowly beginning to close, a last-ditch attempt to lock them in. "Rourke, we need that door open," Halloran barked into her comms. "We're not making it out without a clear path." On it, Captain, Work responded, his voice steady despite the chaos. His sniper rifle cracked, taking out 2 Zarkath who were preparing to deploy explosives near the door. In that moment, time seemed to stretch. Halloran's eyes flicked from the rapidly closing hangar doors to the Zarkath advancing, their weapons charging. Every second felt like an eternity. With one final shot, Work's sniper rifle rang out again. A loud screech filled the air, and the hangar doors slid open just enough to allow the transport to slip through. "Get in now," Halloran shouted to her team. The Vanguard raced toward the ship, only narrowly avoiding the incoming fire from the Zarkath. They scrambled aboard, diving into the cockpit and securing themselves in their seats as the engines roared to life. Halloran sat in the co-pilot seat beside Lai, who was now breathing heavily, sweat covering her face. The transport ship shook as the final thrusters engaged. They were lifting off, but the Exarian were still pursuing, still trying to stop them. "Hold on," Halloran shouted as the transport shot upward, breaking through the hangar's roof and into the cold vacuum of space. The Zarkath launched a final salvo of weapons after them, but it was too late. The transport ship was already on its way out of the facility, rocketing into the darkness of space. "We made it," Lai whispered, her voice raw with relief. "Not yet," Halloran replied, her eyes narrowing as she stared out the front viewport, watching as the Exarian facility began to explode behind them. "But we will." The transport ship hurtled through the vacuum of space, its engines humming steadily as they distanced themselves from the now dying Exarian facility. The explosion behind them was a brilliant fireball, a testament to the destruction they'd narrowly escaped. Halloran slumped back in her seat, wiping the sweat from her brow, but the sense of relief was short-lived. They had won a battle, but the war was far from over. The weight of the data they carried felt heavier now than ever before. "Captain," Lee's voice broke the silence. "I've locked in our course. We'll be in deep space within the hour. We can lay low for a while before heading to the rendezvous point." Halloran nodded, but her mind was elsewhere. She stared out the viewport at the vast emptiness of space, her thoughts swirling. They'd managed to secure the data, the Exarian's secret weapon blueprint. But what did it mean for humanity? Was it enough to tip the scales in their favor, or had they just made themselves an even bigger target? "You did good, Lee," Halloran said, her voice hoarse. "You saved us." Lai gave her a tight smile, but there was no joy in it. "We all did our part, Captain, but it doesn't feel like a victory, does it?" Halloran looked back at her team. Work was checking his sniper rifle, his face grim but focused. Brooks was sitting with his helmet off, rubbing his eyes as if trying to rid himself of the fatigue that was settling in his bones. Their mission had been a success, but at a cost. They'd lost several good soldiers, and the Zarkath had been just a fraction of the Exarian's full might. "I've been in wars before," Lee, Halloran said quietly. "And you're right, it doesn't feel like a victory. Not yet." The truth of it settled in. The Exarian had always been a formidable enemy, but now, with this weapon, they were something else entirely. Halloran knew that the data they had in their possession was critical, but it was also a double-edged sword. If the Exarian had the means to create such a weapon, then the balance of power was shifting, and not in humanity's favor. "Captain, you might want to see this." Work's voice interrupted her thoughts. He was standing by the communications console, his face taut with concern. "We're picking up a distress signal from a Federation freighter nearby." Halloran's eyes narrowed. "What's the situation?" "It's coded," Work replied, "but it looks like they're under attack from Exarian ships." "Damn it." Halloran slammed her fist against the armrest. "We just got out of the fire, and they're already hunting someone else." "All right, plot a course for them, Lai. We'll help however we can." Lai hesitated, her eyes flickering to Halloran's. "Captain, we're already pushing the limits of our fuel reserves. If we go after them, we risk getting stuck out here with no way back." "We don't leave anyone behind," Halloran said with cold resolve. We go in, we make sure that freighter gets the help it needs, and then we get out. If we don't, we're no better than the Exarian. There was no arguing with that. The rest of the team nodded in agreement, their expressions hardening. They had a mission, humanity's future depended on them, and they were willing to pay whatever price necessary to ensure its success. The transport ship altered course, the engines roaring as they shifted toward the distress signal's location. The journey was tense, each passing second feeling like a countdown to the unknown. Halloran sat silently, her mind still focused on the Exarian and their new weapon. They had the data, but without a clear plan on how to use it, they were as vulnerable as ever. Rourke stood behind her, a grim look on his face. You think this could be a trap? The Exarian might know we're carrying the data. It's possible, Halloran replied, but we don't have the luxury of waiting. If we're not proactive, we risk losing everything. The ship raced through the cold, dark void of space, and for a brief moment, Halloran allowed herself to relax, if only for a second. She closed her eyes, trying to push the exhaustion out of her mind. She couldn't afford to let her guard down, not now. As the freighter came into view, Halloran's heart rate spiked. The ship was severely damaged, its hull cracked and venting atmosphere into the void. Zarkith warships circled it like vultures, their weapons trained on the helpless vessel. It was a scene straight out of a nightmare. Lie, prepare for a quick drop, Halloran ordered, her voice low but filled with authority. We're going in hot. Brooks, Rourke, get ready for heavy resistance. We land, we hit hard, and we get those civilians out. The team moved into position, their faces set, and Halloran's mind sharpened with a clarity that only came in the heat of battle. The Exarian were about to learn just how dangerous humanity could be. The transport ship's engines roared as they dove toward the besieged freighter. Halloran's grip tightened on the armrest, her eyes fixed on the damaged ship growing larger in the viewport. The Exarian ships flanked it like a deadly formation, their weapons crackling with energy. They had no time to waste. This wasn't just a rescue mission anymore. It was a fight for survival. Lie, you're up, Halloran ordered, her voice calm despite the chaos mounting around them. Leigh's fingers flew across the console as she adjusted their trajectory, steering the transport ship toward an open gap in the Exarian's formation. If we don't make it through that gap, we're gonna be shredded, Lie said, her voice strained. Then we better make it count, Halloran replied firmly. As the transport hurtled toward the freighter, the Zarkath ships turned their focus on the incoming vessel. Their weapons fired, laser beams lighting up the dark expanse of space, but the transport's shields held firm. Leg gritted her teeth, weaving between the enemy ships, guiding them toward the freighter with precision. We're close, she called out, her eyes fixed on the readings. Brace yourselves. The transport ship jolted as the shields absorbed the brunt of an incoming shot. The hull groaned under the pressure, but the ship held together. Just a little more. Drop us in a few seconds, Halloran said. Rourke, get ready to cover us. Brooks, with me. We're taking the fight to them. Rourke gave a quick nod from the rear, checking his sniper rifle, while Brooks, ever the heavy hitter, gripped his pulse cannon with both hands, his jaw clenched in silent focus. The ship shuddered as Lie engaged the thrusters, diving toward the freighter's docking bay. With a screech, the transport ship slammed into the docking bay's entry point, the force of impact causing the whole ship to shudder. The back doors opened immediately, revealing the chaos inside. The freighter's crew was in disarray, many of them injured, but there was no time to assess the situation. The Exarian would be on them in minutes. Halloran led the charge, her rifle raised and ready. She sprinted toward the freighter's crew, her voice cutting through the air. Move! Get to the escape pods, now! The crew, though clearly terrified, scrambled into action, with Halloran and her team providing cover. Brooks fired a massive shot, taking out a Zarkath that had ventured too close, while Rourke picked off enemies from a distance, his shots precise and deadly. Captain. Lei shouted over the comms, urgency in her voice. More Exarian ships incoming. We won't be able to hold them off for long. Halloran's mind raced. She knew they didn't have much time. The freighter was just a small civilian ship, and the Exarian were bringing down heavier firepower with every passing second. Brooks, cover the crew's retreat. Halloran shouted. We're buying time, but they need to get out of here. Brooks nodded, moving into position. He took up a defensive stance, firing the pulse cannon in rapid succession to hold the Exarian back. The weapon discharged with a thunderous roar, sending shockwaves through the hangar and forcing the Zarkath to retreat momentarily. Halloran turned back to the crew, her voice firm but encouraging. This is your chance. Move now, get to the escape pods, and don't stop until you're clear. As the civilians poured into the pods, Halloran felt the weight of the moment pressing on her. This was the last chance for the freighter's crew to survive. If the Exarian followed them through the jump gate, it would be a bloodbath. But she couldn't dwell on that now. Every decision was a gamble. Every action was a risk. Lei, how soon can we get out of here? Halloran demanded, her eyes darting to the distant viewport, where the first wave of Exarian ships were preparing to close in. 5 minutes, Lei said, her voice grim. If I'm lucky. 5 minutes. Halloran nodded, making the call without hesitation. Get the ship ready, Lei. We're making that jump. As the last of the freighter's crew scrambled into the pods, Warg provided cover with his sniper rifle, picking off the last few Zarkath soldiers. All clear on this side, Captain, he called out, his voice calm under pressure. Halloran quickly keyed in the communication link to the freighter's captain. We've bought you as much time as we could. Get to the jump gate as fast as you can. Go now. The captain's voice crackled through the comms, shaking with gratitude and fear. We won't forget this, Captain. Thank you. You're saving our people. Just make sure you get the word out, Halloran replied. Humanity is going to need allies if we're going to stop the Exarian. Now go. The freighter's escape pods shot off toward the jump gate, their engines flaring brightly as they entered the safety of warp space. Halloran stood, watching them disappear into the distance, feeling a moment of triumph mixed with a deep sense of dread. The team was still alive, the mission still in play, but they had no illusions. The Exarian were coming, and soon every human life would depend on what they did next. Lei, jump us out of here, Halloran said, her voice steady. We're going home. As the transport's engines powered up for the final jump, Halloran's mind raced with the knowledge that the war had only just begun. They had the data, they had survived, but humanity was on the brink. The Exarian would come again, and when they did, the Crimson Vanguard would be ready.